Hi everybody! Today I'm going to show you my new Italian bushcraft knife. We'll have a close look at its factory edge and see if it's any good. We're going to give it a good sharpening session explaining the basics of freehand sharpening. We'll have a look at other sharpening methods and tools. And we're going to answer the question of, are handheld sharpening devices any good comparing to freehand Whetstone sharpening? Let's get to it. First of all, I'm going to soak my sharpening stones in water so they're ready to be used. We're going to soak them well to make sure that the material we remove from the blade is flushed away from the nooks and crannies of the stone surface. If it gets clogged with steel particles, it's not going to cut well anymore. Imagine sanding a wall filler with a sanding block. If the sanding block gets saturated with the dust from the wall, you're done sanding. It will cut into the wall no more, and you need to knock the dust out of the sanding block to make it work again. That's what water does to a whetstone. It keeps the steel dust away and it lubricates the surface. I will be using a few progressively smoother grits of stones. I have a 220 grit stone, which is the coarsest one, and it will remove a lot of steel from the blade. I have a 1000 grit stone, which is great for final shaping of the edge. And then I have a 3000 and an 8000 grit stones for final polishing and smoothing of the surface of the V shape of the cutting edge of the knife. While the whetstones are soaking, let's briefly talk about freehand sharpening and my reasons to learn this method as opposed to easier methods most people would go for. There are different ways to sharpen your knives and other household tools, all with their advantages and disadvantages. Some people prefer simple handheld sharpening devices, electric or manual. They usually produce a sharp knife very quickly and without having to learn any advanced techniques. They also require very little practice to produce an quote-unquote excellent edge. And they don't require any guesswork or understanding of what exactly is happening and why. I admit that I do have a few issues with these tools. Now please bear in mind that I'm generalizing and simplifying here, and I am sure that there are sharpening devices out there that can do a good job, but generally speaking, here is the list of my problems with them. Number 1. They really are just, tools for quick maintenance, just to hone the blade a little bit. In many cases, you can't do exactly what you need to be done to your blade, like focus on a specific part of the edge or play with angles. You can't repair a heavily damaged blade or fix the geometry of the grind with these tools. Number 2, they have a fixed angle that will fit most knives. But if you're a knife guy or if you have different tools that you want to maintain other than your kitchen knives, you need more flexibility. Also, these sharpeners tend to be fixed at about 30 to 45 degrees, which is way too large of an angle. Modern knives with micrograin structure are usually ground in a steeper angle, which allows them to cut more aggressively. Number 3, the edge blunts way quicker than in a case of a properly sharpened knife. Sharpeners like these work by shaving a bit of metal from both sides of the edge, which works fine on low hardness knives, but you risk chipping high hardness knives which don't take kindly to having hard things try to lift a burr on them. Basically, you create a straight burr, or so-called wire edge, that feels really sharp, and it is. But a burr folds on itself easily, or chips away, and the sharpness is quickly lost. And on top of all that, these tools will also damage a good edge with every pass, as they are scraping away a lot of metal as opposed to grinding it. As a result, you end up cutting your tomatoes with a very sharp temporary burr, which folds on itself as soon as you touch the cutting board, basically. Here are some close-up photos of the resulting knife edges using different kinds of handheld sharpeners. I pulled these from knivesandtools.com, and I will include a link to the article in the description below. After I'm finished with my knife, we'll be able to compare it with these images. Stick around for that. So it's quite obvious that freehand sharpening was the best way for me to go about sharpening my knives and tools. It is a peaceful mechanical process. It allows me to put my mind to a calm state and focus on my hands for a while. When mastered, freehand sharpening is a versatile tool in your toolbox, which is applicable to many tools around the house or the workshop. From knives with different grinds to chisels, planes, scissors, and anything else with a cutting edge, really. It really is just a nice activity to be good at. And the fact that it takes longer to sharpen a knife properly this way is far outbalanced by the result itself and the fact that there's yet another thing that you can do well. So here's my knife I got for Christmas in 2020. It is a Moletta range from an Italian manufacturer called Lionsteel. The blade material is Sleipner steel, which is a high alloyed stainless tool steel. It is a tough knife steel with a high abrasive wear resistance, adhesive wear resistance, and chipping and cracking resistance. And since we are going to be wearing the steel off quite rapidly during the sharpening process, it is harder to sharpen too. We just need to take our time with this one. But first of all, let's have a look at the state of the factory blade, the way it came in. It is a little disappointing to see marks of machining not only on the side of the blade, but protruding into the cutting bevel as well. Don't get me wrong, the knife is sharp enough, but it just doesn't hold a candle to a professionally sharpened edge. Let's go ahead and try to fix that. I'm going to skip the two 20 grit stones since the geometry of the primary bevel will be perfect from the factory, and we're only going to be touching up the very surface of it. 220 grit is way too coarse and it should only be used when there is a lot of material to be removed from a chipped or otherwise damaged blade. So here's the 1000 grit. First of all, we need to find the correct angle to hold the knife in, so the whole area of the primary edge is being worked on. This requires a bit of experience, but the angle is generally between 17 and 25 degrees. Some people use black Sharpies to paint the edge of the knife black to be able to keep track of what parts of the edge are being removed. I prefer to depend on my own eyes to see the tip of the edge touching the stone, and then to check the edge for wear marks up close to verify that I'm holding the knife at the correct angle. Now, the cutting edge of the knife doesn't run at a straight line, it angles up towards the tip of the knife. So when working on the blade along its full length, you need to adjust the angles to make sure that whatever part of the edge you're working on always has a good contact with the stone. There is a lot of muscle memory involved in this process, and it takes a bit of time to build it up to make sure that you're comfortably maintaining the correct pressure and the correct angles throughout the process. It is quite easy to do more damage to your knife than good, so make sure to practice on a cheaper knife before you feel comfortable with the process and your results. You can see me doing edge leading and edge trailing moves here. An edge leading move is a move with the edge going in first, as if you wanted to cut into the stone. And an edge trailing move is a move with the edge being dragged behind. I am applying a good amount of pressure on an edge trailing move, and I ease off the pressure when the edge goes in first. I also work the knife at a horizontal angle to the stone. This is quite arbitrary, but I like to maintain somewhere around 45 degrees between the knife and the longitudinal axis of the stone. There are only a few main rules that you need to adhere to when sharpening freehand. Rule number 1 is consistency. Whatever angle and technique you use, maintain it throughout the process. Rule number 2, Make sure you don't move to a higher grit stone until you are happy that your knife is sharp on the current stone. If you aren't happy that your knife is sharp, moving to a finer stone will not change that. It will only make the surface smoother without actually making the knife any sharper. Rule number 3, roll the burr. A burr along the full length of the blade is the most reliable indicator that one side of the knife has been sharpened properly. Do not switch to the other side of the knife unless you can feel a burr all across the length of the blade on one side. So I am on my 1000 grit stone now, and I'm working just one side of the knife. And I'll continue doing that until I create a detectable burr on the other side of the knife, at which point I will switch to the other side of the knife to knock down the burr and create one on the first side of the knife. Then I will alternate between both sides of the knife more frequently, making less and less of lighter and lighter passes to roll the burr until it gives up and falls off. This way we'll end up with a burr-free, sharp edge. Once that happens, you can just stop there and dry your knife and start using it. 1000 grit is fine enough of a stone for most purposes, and you may not need to go any further. You don't really need a razor-sharp knife, you just need a knife that is sharp enough for the job. For example, if you're a cook in the restaurant, sharp enough is what you need in a stressful daily situation, and too sharp of a knife can be a risk as well as a dull knife. In my case, I'd like to achieve a razor sharp and smooth edge every once in a while, and since this is my brand new knife, I want to give it a full welcome treatment. Under a microscope, you will be able to see the grinding marks as deep scratches in the material, even with 1000 grit stone, which is already quite fine. By using finer stones, we're looking to make shallower and finer scratches into the high spots of the marks left by the previous grit to make the surface gradually smoother. With the finer stones, you are again looking for a full-length burr, but in this case it will be much finer and harder for you to feel. That being said, your wet fingers are very sensitive, and you should be able to detect even a small burr that is just forming at the very edge of the blade. A burr is tiny but very sharp, so it will catch on your skin. Once you are completely happy with the state of your blade, it is time for a few final steps. Step number 1, stropping with leather. A piece of leather glued to a flat surface is an inexpensive tool which will allow you to do one last polishing step on the blade. A stropping tool usually comes bundled with a very fine abrasive medium, aka polishing compound, in a small block, which further increases the stropping effect when loaded onto the leather. The main goals of this last polishing step are to straighten the burr at the very tip of the edge and to provide one final abrasion step, further smoothing the abrasion marks left by the last stone. Even though the blade of my knife is made of a type of a stainless steel, I prefer oiling the blade to protect it against the elements, especially moisture in the air, which can cause oxidation and unnecessary staining if the knife is stored for a longer time. This would normally be done after use and after sharpening, before the knife is put away for storage. A fine layer of mineral oil is a very quick way to preserve the blade surface. As promised, Here are some close-up photos of the finished blade, showing a remarkable difference between the freehand sharpened blade and a blade destroyed by handheld sharpeners. I hope you liked my video. Give it a thumbs up to help me with the YouTube algorithm, and I'll see you next time.